Yesterday, Jim Acosta got his press access revoked from the White House. And now you've got people on the left saying this is an attack on the free press. It's what dictatorships do. You've got people on the right saying this is a long time coming. Jim Acosta keeps doing this. Now I find myself slightly leaning towards more of the opinion that many people on the right have, because Jim Acosta has been behaving in an unprofessional manner for a really long time. And I think a lot of the people who are defending him don't pay attention too much to what this guy does. For those that aren't familiar, yesterday at the press briefing with Donald Trump, he asked a question, and then Donald Trump was fairly rude back at Acosta because they've had a back and forth. Acosta then asked another question. Trump then answered. The White House intern then tried to take the microphone from him. Some people say that she yanked it. Some people say that he chopped her arm. We'll look at the footage and run it in slow-mo. He then asked a third question. Donald Trump answered. They gave the mic to somebody else, and then Acosta stood up again and started yelling without the mic at Donald Trump some questions. So, in my opinion, this has been a long time coming. It's not the first time that Jim Acosta has done this, and in fact, in 2017, Jim Acosta actually was called out by other journalists for his behavior. So that's what we're going to look at today. And I want to go through the footage, and I want to explain to you, for those that don't believe that Jim Acosta was struggling over the mic with this young woman, I'm going to slow you down the footage, and I'm going to explain to you why it is more likely that Jim Acosta used his left arm to try and push her arm away than it is that she yanked him down. But before we get started, please head over to patreon.com/Timcast if you want to support my work. Patrons are the backbone of the content I create, so if you like these videos and you want to see more, then head over to patreon.com/Timcast and become a patron today. From the Hill, Acosta, I didn't put my hands on White House intern. This is his official statement. He said this on CNN, and it really does feel like we're arguing a game of semantics. This statement was in response to the official statement by Sarah Sanders when she tweeted, "President Trump believes in a free press and expects and welcomes tough questions of him and his administration. We will, however, never tolerate a reporter placing his hands on a young woman just trying to do her job as a White House intern." Naturally, the response to this from many people on the left was that Acosta did not put his hands on this woman. Acosta says he didn't put his hands on her, he didn't touch her. That's not true, he did. And some people have actually blamed the woman, saying she touched Acosta. It's really strange to me that people would defend Acosta in this manner over the presumably 105-pound, 20-something-year-old female intern who is just trying to take the mic away and bring it to somebody else, who was already standing up and waiting to give a question. Jim Acosta had been talking for several minutes, and other journalists are in the room too. You know, a lot of people say that he was doing his job asking tough questions, and I say, sure. The question he asked was first about the migrant caravan and Trump's framing of it, and I think that's fair, though it has been asked before. He then asked another question about that, then asked a question about Russia, over 2.5 minutes about. He was talking to Trump, and Trump said, okay, enough, somebody else. Someone from NBC News stood up, and the intern came to take the mic and hand it to somebody else. That's completely normal. In fact, I've been to events where people go up and ask hard questions of panelists and speakers, and when they do, they get pulled out. Right? There are people at VidCon who came up to ask questions, and then they get escorted out by security. They get pushed away from the microphone. But you also have to consider the greater context here, in that Jim Acosta has been called out for this behavior before. Over a year ago, the Washington Post actually called out Jim Acosta, saying that what he is doing is not reporting. The Washington Post said this. In an article from Paul Farhi in 2017, Grandstanding or Truth Teller, CNN's Acosta walks a fine line with Trump. He says, Acosta's remarks aren't just blunt, they're unusual. Reporters are supposed to report, not opine. Yet Acosta's disdain has flowed openly, raising a question about how far a reporter, supposedly a neutral arbiter of facts, not a commenter on them, can and should go. This is because it is a well-established fact at this point that Acosta frequently inserts himself into the story. And that's fine if he wants to do that, but this is the White House press corps. This is where journalists will ask questions of the president and then get a response. Often the president and their spokespeople lie. It's what politicians have always done. And Trump did take a substantial amount of questions at yesterday's briefing. But what Jim Acosta is doing is not in line with what many journalists actually do. He goes in there and he makes a story about himself. He argues with the president. They had a back and forth for several minutes, and then when the White House intern tried to take the mic from him, he actually gripped it and pulled it in and resisted. So let's take a look at the footage, and now I want to explain to you why I believe Jim Acosta, although this incident isn't assault, he didn't attack this woman, he did cross a line, simply because this moment was a grain of sand, right? It's not the most egregious offense in the world, but Jim Acosta keeps doing this. He keeps doing this. They called him out in 2017 for it, and Paul Farhi wasn't the only one to point out that Jim Acosta is acting more like a pundit than a reporter. But again, let's look at the footage and we'll watch it in slow motion. This is actually CNN's footage, and I'm using CNN's footage on purpose because Jim Acosta said he did not touch her. So let's watch what happened in slow motion. You can see the intern goes, she reaches over his arm to try and grab the mic. He pulls away. She looks to Trump, she tries again, he pulls away. He resists giving up the mic as he tries to ask a third question. She reaches under his arm makes a downward motion. Now here's what's important. A lot of people have said this is because she's yanking the microphone and his arm is simply moving downward. But there's a few things I want to point out as we slowly move backwards and go through the footage so I can explain why I believe, at least, this is Jim Acosta using his left arm to push her arm down. I believe that what he was trying to do when she made a move for the mic was to just push her arm away. I don't think he was trying to attack or anything. I think he was once again pulling away and trying to stop her from grabbing the microphone. That's what he had done twice before. This is a small woman. She's not very large. When she grabs the microphone, yes, Acosta's arm is already in this position. I don't believe that he judo chopped her or whatever people are saying. But if the idea is that she yanked, why does Acosta's arm move down? Look, the joke I've been making is that maybe when she yanked, she created vacuum force, which pulled Jim Acosta's arm down. That doesn't make sense. The only other logical explanation is that Jim Acosta's arm was resting on her elbow, which I don't believe makes sense. Also, take a look at her left shoulder. When his hand moves down, her left shoulder and body moves towards his. What this says to me is that yes, she did reach to grab the microphone from him. You may say that was inappropriate, maybe she should not have done that, but look, this is what happens at briefings all the time. People will come and take the microphone away from you if you go on for several minutes. Jim Acosta's arm makes a downward motion. Her body gets pulled inward, which says to me what's likely happening is you can see Jim Acosta's wrist on her elbow. He is likely pushing his arm down, and that's what makes it look like she's yanking when I personally don't believe she is. Now, in my opinion, I think a lot of the confusion comes because if you watch the interaction and only look at Jim Acosta, it does look like she's yanking the microphone from him. But if you look at her elbow and her shoulder, it really does look like Jim Acosta uses his left arm to push her arm down, seemingly to move her arm away. That is what I believe happened. I believe that when you look at the previous incident where he pulls back and tries to move away from her attempts to grab the mic, it looks like he's not resting his hand on her elbow, and his hand moves down. I really doubt vacuum force caused his arm to move downward. I'm being a bit facetious, but unless Jim Acosta literally was resting his arm on her elbow, it doesn't make sense why his arm would be moving down unless he was just trying to move her arm away and stop her from grabbing the mic. That makes the most sense, and I'm going to say it again. Her shoulder is pulled inwards. She was pulled off balance, likely because Jim Acosta's left arm pushed down, and because she was holding the mic, it yanked her forward. She was pulled forward. Jim Acosta was not pulled forward. I do not believe she tried to yank it away from him, but this really just seems like a non-issue. The reality is, Jim Acosta should have given up the mic after several minutes of repeatedly asking questions, and you can see there's another journalist standing up ready to ask a question, and many other journalists have their hands raised. Jim Acosta isn't the only person in the room. It's also important to point out that Jim Acosta said he didn't touch her. I think we're arguing semantics here. But yes, Jim Acosta did touch her. Did his hand touch this intern? It did. It really did. His palm didn't touch her. It's the back of his hand. And in fact, someone arguing with me on Twitter actually deleted their tweet when I sent them this photograph. Because Jim Acosta, you can see there's motion blur. His hand moved down. It pulled her inward. It seems to me like he was trying to push her arm away. And yes, he made contact with this woman. So Jim Acosta's statement is absolutely incorrect. But it really is fascinating to me how the media is playing this up. They're saying that Donald Trump is banning Acosta for asking a question, when that's not the case. I mean, Jim Acosta asked 3 questions, and Trump responded to all of them. And when the intern tried to take the mic from him, that's what we just saw. But you know who really understands what's going on is Jon Stewart, because about a week or so ago, he gave an interview to CNN where he said that you can see the narcissism of these reporters. They're taking it all personally when Trump says these things. And I'd have to imagine he's specifically referring to Jim Acosta because most journalists have been very professional when it comes to issues with Trump. This is from October 31st, Hollywood Reporter. Jon Stewart says Trump's attacks on media appeals to journalists' own narcissism. In an interview with Christiane Amanpour, he said, "I think that journalists have taken it personally. They are personally wounded and offended by this man. He baits them. What he's done well, I thought, is appeal to their own narcissism." He added, "They take it personally. And now he has changed the conversation to not that his policies are silly or not working or any of those things. It's all about the fight. He is able to tune out everything else and just get people focused on the fight, and he's going to win that fight." Jon Stewart's right. Jim Acosta works for CNN. Their ratings aren't so great, and so some people have said that CNN is simply trying to generate ratings. In my opinion, I do not believe Jim Acosta is trying to tell the story. I believe he's trying to be a pundit. He's trying to be the story. That's fine. You know, Jim Acosta has complained about Trump supporters giving him the finger, about how rude people are to him, about getting death threats, and I can respect all of that. I can respect everything Jim Acosta does. But it's important not to conflate Jim Acosta with a journalist. I don't go down to these events and opine and get into back and forths with people. I don't do it. When I was at Politicon, I had a question for a panel, mostly of progressives. I asked my question, and I immediately sat back down. And I am pretty much a pundit, okay? A lot of people say that, I'm an objective journalist and all that stuff, but when you watch my YouTube videos and you see me doing this, I'm basically opining. You will never see me go down and get into an argument with the president. If Jim Acosta wants to be a pundit and express his opinion on Donald Trump's criticism of the press, he should do it, and I respect him for doing so. But if he wants a White House press credential and he wants to go to the White House briefings and opine on what he thinks is wrong with Trump's commentary, if he wants to interject his opinion back at Trump, which he has done in the past, then he shouldn't be doing it at the White House. He should be doing what Tucker Carlson does. He should be doing what Steven Crowder does. He should be doing what I do. I don't go into the briefings to express my opinion. Now, absolutely, journalists should be calling out Donald Trump with hard questions. But in my opinion, on top of everything that happened, I don't think he's doing that. If a journalist went to Trump and said, your weapons deal with Saudi Arabia is going to inflame the tensions with Yemen, the drone bombings, the murder, the commando raids, you are arming Saudi Arabia for their war with Yemen, that would be a tough question. If someone questioned him on the extrajudicial assassinations of the previous administration and how some of this collateral damage has continued into the Trump era, that'd be a tough question. Simply saying Trump's statement about the migrant caravan and about Russia collusion, those are not entirely tough questions, and other journalists were asking them. So, look, it is absolutely fair if a journalist wants to have a back and forth because they're asking hard questions. But Jim Acosta does this all the time. Grains of sand eventually make a heap, and thus Jim Acosta has been banned. Look, people just, we're all watching the same video, but we're seeing different things. CNN actually tweeted out that video I just showed you saying, see, nothing happened. And it's crazy to me. But as I mentioned earlier, what I think really happened is that when you look at Jim Acosta's hand holding the mic, it looks like she yanked it. But if you look at the girl's arm, the woman's arm, it looks like she's being pushed down. And depending on where people will naturally train their eyes, they're going to see something entirely different. On top of that, look, I think this is a hard tribal bias issue. People who like Trump are sick and tired of Acosta, and people who hate Trump are going to take everything they can to say Trump is wrong. People are going to, it's confirmation bias. And this is a political Rorschach test. Depending on what you see is what tribe you're in, I suppose. Look, it's possible for multiple things to be true at the same time. That Trump absolutely was being rude to Acosta, and he has been in the past. Absolutely. Acosta asked him a question, and Trump immediately rolled his eyes, said, here we go, and started being rude with him. So Acosta gives back. But just because Trump is turning the press briefing into a WWE, kind of rhetoric, doesn't mean Jim Acosta should be doing it either. By all means, call out Trump, and that's what NBC did, said it, spoke in defense of Jim Acosta. What Jim Acosta does all the time is make the story about him. If he wants to do that, by all means, but he shouldn't be acting like a journalist. People are calling him an activist, but look, let's be real. Jim Acosta is a journalist. He is. It's possible to be a journalist and an activist. It's possible to be a journalist and a pundit. It doesn't mean that, just because you're a journalist, you never have an opinion, you never make statements, and you never advocate for anything. If you want to call me a journalist, you need to consider that I've advocated for things like free speech and free expression and open internet and things of that nature, right? I am mostly doing punditry. What you're seeing right now is not necessarily journalism. I'm trying to better understand something and express how I feel about it. That's an opinion. On this channel you'll find mostly that my stories begin with the news about an issue and then move into my opinion, but it's pretty mixed. It's usually an analysis. So, look, if you're going to call me a journalist, you have to recognize that Jim Acosta is too. The difference, I would say, to be fair, is that Jim Acosta is getting press credentials, going into these events, and getting into arguments with the president. There's a big difference between being a journalist and being a pundit who wants to debate the president. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I think, obviously, look, you're on YouTube. You're probably going to think Acosta crossed the line. And I think a lot of the people who are defending him just haven't seen him do this in the past and don't know that the Washington Post has called him out over this a year ago, a year and a half ago. But again, comment below. We'll keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. Stay tuned. New videos every day at 4 p.m. And I've got more videos coming up on my second channel, youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m. Stick around for that, and I'll see you all next time.